The night Sloane Whitaker got her first promotion, she wore the wrong dress. She knew it the moment she stepped into the elevator at Meridian Tower and caught her reflection in the polished steel doors. The black satin had looked fine in her apartment under the warm glow of the bathroom light. Here, under the brutal fluorescence of corporate architecture, it pulled across her hips in a way that made her want to press the lobby button and go home. She didn't. She had worked 18 months for this. She had earned this. The Meridian Group's annual awards gala was held on the 52nd floor, in a space that opened onto the Chicago skyline like a theater curtain pulled back to reveal the whole burning city. Sloane stepped off the elevator and immediately clocked every size 0 woman in the room, the way she always did, catalogued them automatically, involuntarily, the way people catalog exits in case of fire. It was a habit born from years of walking into rooms where she knew she would be the largest person, the one who took up slightly too much space for everyone's comfort. She smoothed her dress with one hand and carried her champagne glass with the other like a prop. Something to hold so her hands wouldn't give her away. The room was spectacular. Sloane would give Meridian that. Floor-to-ceiling glass, city lights scattered below like a second galaxy, and a crowd of Chicago's most aggressively accomplished people circling the canapé stations with that particular brand of social hunger she had come to recognize over 6 years in financial consulting. These were people who ate dinner but called it networking, who laughed but calculated the return on every syllable. Sloane understood them. She had grown up watching her mother clean the offices of people like this in a suburb 40 minutes outside the city. She had spent 12 years becoming fluent in their language without ever quite being invited to speak it. Her boss, Renata Fowler, found her near the window and pressed a warm hand against her shoulder blade. "There she is," Renata said, and the pride in her voice was so genuine that Sloane felt her chest do something complicated. "Senior analyst. God, I've been waiting to say that out loud. You've been saying it all week. I'll keep saying it. Drink your champagne, Whitaker. You earned this room." Sloane drank. The champagne was dry and cold and tasted like relief. It lasted approximately 14 minutes. She was crossing toward the far end of the room to find the colleague she'd been trying to connect with for 3 weeks. A due diligence lead named Powell, who was notoriously impossible to pin down when she heard it. A voice she recognized, low, performatively casual, the kind of voice that had spent years learning to deliver cruelty without raising its volume. "Sloane," she stopped. Edmund Hale was standing near the bar with 2 men she didn't know, both in expensive suits, both already smiling with the advance knowledge that something entertaining was about to happen. Edmund had that effect on people. He had always had that effect. He was the kind of man who made witnesses out of bystanders. He was also the man she had almost married. Sloane turned around slowly. She had exactly 2 choices: own the moment or flinch. She had learned painfully that flinching around Edmund was like bleeding in open water. "Edmund," she said. He looked at her with that particular expression she had spent 2 years learning to decode. The slow elevator ride of his eyes from her face down and back up. The microsecond pause that was meant to land like a verdict. "You look." He tilted his head. "Well." One of the men beside him pressed his lips together. The other looked away. Edmund continued, because Edmund always continued. "I heard about your promotion. Congrats. You must be relieved. I imagine the hours kept your mind off." His gaze moved pointedly, deliberately, the way a hand moves to indicate a direction. Other things. She knew what he meant. She had heard it 100 times in 100 different registers over the course of their 2 years together, and in the 8 months since the engagement ended. Other things. The dress that didn't zip. The photograph she asked him to retake. The restaurant where he'd murmured, leaning close across the table in a voice that sounded like concern. "You might want to skip the bread, honestly, it's a lot." "I'm doing fine, Edmund," she said. Her voice came out even. She was proud of it. "You look it," he said, and his mouth curved in a way that said the opposite. "Really?" He glanced at her body again, that same measured pause, the performance of restraint. Good for you. And then, because she had not broken yet, because she was still standing there with her champagne and her promotion and her 12 years of work. He leaned slightly toward one of the men beside him and said, not quietly, she was always so. He searched the air for the word with theatrical patience. Spirited, that's what I used to call it. The man beside him laughed. Something inside Sloane went very still. She had learned, over time, that the stillness was not weakness. It was what happened when every part of her pulled itself inward to assess damage. It was the body's version of how bad is it, can we continue? The same assessment a ship's crew performs in the seconds after impact, before deciding whether to abandon or hold position. She decided to hold position. Enjoy your evening, she said, and turned. She made it approximately 12 feet before her heel caught slightly on a seam in the flooring. Nothing dramatic, a single off-balance step. And she heard Edmund's voice behind her, low and amused, easy. The word landed between her shoulder blades like a dart. She did not turn back. She crossed to the far side of the room, set her champagne glass on the nearest surface, and stood facing the city and its 52 floors of empty air and thought, with extraordinary calm, I am not going to cry at my own promotion party. She wasn't. But the night had gone wrong in the way nights sometimes went wrong when Edmund Hale was in the room. The way a song could be ruined by hearing it at the wrong moment, so that every future listening carried the memory of the damage. You're going to break that glass. The voice came from her left, low enough that it was clearly directed at her and no one else. She turned, and the man standing there was not looking at her. He was looking at the city, one hand resting in his jacket pocket, a glass of something amber held loosely in the other hand. His profile was sharp and unhurried. He was built the way certain men were built, as though the body had decided on its own terms and declined to negotiate, and he wore a suit that cost more than Sloane's monthly rent without making it into a performance. She looked down. Her right hand was, in fact, pressed around her champagne flute with a force that was producing a faint tremor in the glass. She released the pressure. "Thank you," she said, which was not the sentence she had planned. He turned then. He had dark eyes, direct and unhurried, and when they landed on her, they didn't move in that cataloguing way she was used to, didn't make the inventory Edmunds had. They stayed. "Nikolaev," he said, not an introduction so much as a fact being offered. "Alexei Nikolaev, Sloane Whitaker." He nodded, as if she had confirmed something he'd already suspected. "You work at Meridian." "I was just promoted, actually, tonight." She wasn't sure why she said it. It came out like something she was reminding herself of. "I know." He looked back at the city. "I'm one of Meridian's silent partners. I have the reports." He paused. "Your risk analysis on the Hartfield acquisition, that was yours?" "Yes. It was the best piece of work that came across my desk in the last 2 years. I told Renata Fowler she was foolish for not promoting you sooner." Sloane had no immediate response to this. She was accustomed to her work being praised in the abstract, by people who praised work the way they praised weather, generally, impersonally in passing. This was different. This was specific and quiet, and landed somewhere below the region where professional praise usually reached. "I didn't know Meridian had silent partners with reading habits," she said. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "Most don't. I made an exception." They stood side by side for a moment, looking at the city. She could feel the warmth of the room at her back, and the cold coming off the glass in front of her, and the specific quality of standing next to someone who was not performing anything. Not working the room, not calibrating their position, not calculating the return on every word. It was disorienting in the way that sudden quiet was disorienting after a long period of noise. "The man at the bar," Nikolaev said without looking away from the window. "Who is he to you?" She didn't pretend not to know which man. "He was my fiancé, until 8 months ago, and before that, 2 years. A silence. "He said something," Nikolaev said. It was not a question. "He said several things. He generally does." She hesitated. "He implied that my promotion was a consolation prize." and he looked at me in the way he has always looked at me, which is to say, she stopped. This was more than she had intended to say to a stranger, to a man she had known for 4 minutes, to anyone who was not her best friend Claudette. "It's not relevant. It's relevant to me," Nikolaev said. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. "Why?" she asked. He held her gaze. "Because a man who speaks to a woman the way he just spoke to you shouldn't be allowed to stand in the same room as her without understanding the consequences of it." Something moved through her chest. Not the romantic flutter she might have dismissed. Something older than that. Something that felt more like finally than anything else. "His name is Edmund Hale," she said. "He's a managing director at Kessler Partners. He comes to Meridian events because he was on our advisory board until last year." Nikolaev nodded. Just once, unhurried. "Come," he said, and he didn't touch her, didn't take her arm or steer her with a hand at her back the way men sometimes did when they wanted to signal ownership. He simply turned, and because there was something in the way he moved that suggested he was going somewhere specific, and she might want to see it, she followed. He led her across the room and through a pair of glass doors that opened onto a terrace none of the other guests appeared to have found. The December air hit her immediately, cold and clean and sharp with the smell of the lake, but after the room's crowded warmth it felt like surfacing. They stood at the terrace railing, the city spread below them in every direction, all that light. "Tell me something," he said. What did you tell yourself when you got dressed tonight?" She frowned. "That's a strange question. Humor me." She thought about it, the bathroom light, the reflection in the elevator, the specific arithmetic of walking into a room and calculating exits. "I told myself I had earned the room," she said. "My boss told me the same thing. And then he saw you, and you stopped believing it." She said nothing. "You walked into that room believing something about yourself," he continued, "and he said 2 sentences, and you gave him the authority to revise it." He looked at her directly. "That's the thing I want you to understand about men like Edmund Hale. Their cruelty is only effective because you give their opinion structural weight. You built him a podium. I know that intellectually. Knowing it intellectually and knowing it in the room where it's happening are 2 different things." He turned to lean against the railing, facing the room through the glass rather than the city. "You wrote an analysis of the Hartfield acquisition that identified 3 risk vectors every other consultant missed. You saw the thing no one else in that room had the framework to seize." "That's work," she said. "Work is different." "Why?" She opened her mouth, closed it. It was a question she had never been asked before. Not like that, direct and genuinely curious, without the implication that the answer was obvious. As though the distinction she had always made, the firewall she had built between professional competence and personal worthiness, was not a law of physics but a choice. As though someone was asking her, seriously, why she had built it there. "I don't know," she said finally, and was surprised by how true it was. Nikolaev looked at her for a long moment. His expression was not soft exactly. He was not a soft man. She had understood that within the first 30 seconds, but there was something in it that had the quality of attention, the specific, costly kind that people rarely gave freely. "You should go back in," he said. "Powell has been trying to get your attention for 15 minutes. He's standing near the second column from the left." She blinked. "How do you know about Powell?" "Because I also read the Hartfield Files appendix, and his initials are on the counterparty communication. You've been trying to reach him for 3 weeks. She stared at him. "Go," he said, not unkindly. "You have work to do, and you've already given more of tonight to Edmund Hale than he deserves." She went. She found Powell, who was indeed near the second column, and who turned out to be exactly as useful as she had hoped, and they spoke for 22 minutes about a counterparty issue that had been sitting unresolved on her desk since September, and by the end of it she had a meeting scheduled for the following week that could change the trajectory of a project she had been quietly fighting for since the previous spring. She looked back at the terrace. The glass doors were closed. Nikolaev was gone. The next morning, she found a single envelope on her desk when she arrived at 7:30. No logo, no return address, cream-colored paper, her name on the front in handwriting that was precise and unhurried. Inside was a card. On it was written, "The podium you built him. Take it apart. You won't need it." And below that, a phone number. Nothing else. She sat down slowly in her chair. She read it twice. She turned it over as if the back might explain something. It didn't. She thought about Edmund's voice. She thought about 12 feet of carpeted floor and a dart between the shoulder blades. She thought about the specific quality of being seen by someone who was looking for the right things. She didn't call the number that day. She was not, in spite of what the previous evening might suggest, a woman who responded to dramatic gestures from men she had known for 45 minutes. She was, however, a woman who did her research. Within 48 hours, she had learned that Alexei Nikolaev was 41 years old, born in Kiev, educated at LSE and Wharton, and the majority stakeholder in Nikolaev Capital Group, a private investment firm that controlled somewhere between $3.2 and $4.7 billion in assets, depending on which quarter you were reading. He had no social media presence. He had declined 3 profiles in major financial publications in the past 2 years. He appeared in photographs only when he could not help it. Charity events, the occasional board meeting leaked image, and in every one of them he stood at the edge of the frame, with the particular posture of a man who had decided early in life that the center was for people who needed it. She also learned that Edmund Hale had been quietly asked to remove himself from the Meridian Advisory Board, not because his term had ended, as the official communication had implied, but because Alexei Nikolaev had submitted a detailed written objection to his continued presence 8 months ago, the month the engagement ended. He had cited professional conduct concerns and attached documentation she could not access. She called the number on a Thursday morning because Thursdays were, statistically, her most clear-headed days. "Whitaker," he said, when he picked up after 2 rings, as if he had been expecting a specific call from a specific person and had arranged his day around it. "You had Edmund removed from the board," she said. A pause. "Yes, before we spoke at the gala. Months before. Yes, you read the Hartfield file months before the gala. Yes." She absorbed this. "You knew who I was when you came to stand next to me at the window." "I knew your work," he said. "I knew your name. When I saw him speak to you, I decided to introduce myself. That's," she searched for the word, "that's unusual. Probably. Why?" she asked. The same question as before. This time the pause was longer. "Because you were standing at the window, holding your glass too tightly and not breaking," he said. "And I found that more impressive than anything else in the room." She sat with that for a moment. "I'm not looking for someone to fight my battles," she said. "I know that. Edmund doesn't scare me. I know that too. Then what? I'm not asking you to need anything from me, Sloane." It was the first time he had used her first name. It came out naturally, the way names came out when someone had turned them over in their mind often enough that they had worn smooth. "I'm asking if you'd have dinner with me. Next Wednesday, if you're available." She was. She had a standing appointment with Claudette on Wednesdays, but Claudette would reschedule without requiring an explanation. She would, in fact, require details, which was its own problem for a later moment. "What restaurant?" she asked. "Your choice. Entirely." She almost laughed. She had forgotten what it was like to be asked a question by a man who actually wanted the answer. She chose Sable, which was a steakhouse on the north side that she loved, and had eaten at Alone twice in the past year because the people she might have taken there had opinions about steakhouses, about portions, about the particular caloric math of a good meal shared without apology. Nikolaev showed up 7 minutes early, which she learned because she was also 7 minutes early. They arrived at the table at the same time. He ordered a bottle of red wine and asked her what she wanted to eat before he looked at his own menu, and when she ordered the ribeye, the 32-ounce one, the one she had talked herself out of on both previous solo visits, he didn't react. He ordered the same. They talked for 4 hours. She had never talked to a man for 4 hours without the conversation developing, somewhere in its architecture. A room she was not allowed to enter. A subject that signaled its edges with a particular quality of withdrawal, a small verbal retraction, the faint lowering of temperature that indicated this far, no further. Edmund's conversations had been full of those rooms. She had spent 2 years mistaking locked doors for depth. Nikolaev had no locked doors. He had strong opinions, rigorously held, and when she disagreed with him, which she did twice, on things that mattered, he argued back with the focused pleasure of someone who genuinely wanted to know if he was wrong. Not to win, to know. It was disorienting. It was also, she was slowly realizing, the thing she had been hungering for so long that she had stopped recognizing it as hunger. He walked her to the car she had called. At the curb he stood with his hands in his coat pockets and looked at her. "Next week," he said. "If you want. I have a meeting Tuesday. Could be late. Wednesday, then." "Wednesday," she agreed. He nodded. He did not try to kiss her. He did not engineer a moment. He simply looked at her the way he had been looking at her all evening, as though she was exactly where she was supposed to be, and the world was organized correctly. And then he turned and walked back toward the restaurant, because he had left his jacket. She got in the car and sat back and thought, very deliberately, about nothing for approximately 4 blocks before she took out her phone and texted Claudette. "I need to tell you something." Claudette texted back 12 seconds later, "I know, and I want all of it." She smiled at the window. 3 weeks later, the invitation arrived. Edmund Hale's annual winter party was a Chicago institution of a specific, exhausting variety. The kind of gathering where everyone who was invited knew they had been invited to perform gratitude for being included, and everyone who was not invited spent December reconstructing the guest list from LinkedIn activity. Sloane had attended for 2 years during the engagement and had dreaded it both times. She had not expected to receive an invitation this year. She had received one anyway, which she interpreted as a message of the kind Edmund had always preferred, the kind with no return address. She did not plan to go. She told Nikolaev about it over dinner, their 6th dinner by this point, a Wednesday ritual that had become the fixed point around which she organized her weeks without quite acknowledging she was doing it, and he listened without expression. "You don't want to go," he said. "I don't want to go, then don't. If I don't go, he'll interpret it as Sloane." The way he said it, quietly, with a certainty that wasn't demanding her agreement but simply existed, stopped her mid-sentence. "Whose interpretation matters to you, his or yours?" She looked at him across the table. "Mine," she said. "Then what do you want?" She thought about it. What she actually wanted, without the scaffolding of what Edmund would think, or what it would signal, or what room she would, or would not be allowed back into. "I want to go," she said slowly. "Not for him. I want to walk into that room and talk to the people I want to talk to and not shrink." Nikolaev was quiet for a moment. "Then we'll go," he said. She hadn't asked him to come. She noticed that she also hadn't told him not to. Edmund's party was held in his Gold Coast apartment, which occupied an entire floor of a building designed to make everyone who entered it feel the correct degree of inferior. Sloane had felt it both previous times. She felt it now in the lobby for approximately 30 seconds. Then the elevator doors opened on Edmund's floor and Nikolaev stepped out beside her, and she became aware of a shift in the geometry of the evening. The way you became aware of a new building on a familiar street, the way it reorganized everything around it without touching anything. She had not told him what to wear. He was wearing a dark suit and a black overcoat, and the specific expression of a man who occupied rooms on his own terms and had never been required to do otherwise. Edmund found her within 4 minutes, because Edmund always found her, because he had a particular radar for the people whose presence he needed to manage. He came from her left, and his face moved through 3 distinct expressions in the span of 2 seconds. Recognition, calculation, and then the thing that replaced his usual confidence so briefly that she might have missed it if she hadn't spent 2 years studying his face. It was uncertainty. It was there and then gone. Sloane, he said smoothly. His eyes moved to Nikolaev. Edmund, you know Alexei Nikolaev. It was not technically a question. It was not technically an introduction either. It was a statement. Calm, unhurried, allowing Edmund to locate himself in the room in relation to the name. She watched him locate himself. Alexei Nikolaev, the man who had quietly, without announcement, withdrawn $240 million from a fund that Edmund's former advisory board had been courting. The man whose name appeared at the top of a letter that had ended Edmund's advisory position at Meridian. The man who had declined to comment when a financial journalist had asked about the withdrawal, which in financial circles was understood as a comment of its own. Edmund knew. She had known he would know. Of course, Edmund said. His voice had subtly recalibrated, still smooth but at a different register. Mr. Nikolaev, I didn't realize you and Sloane were. He searched for the word. We are, Nikolaev said simply. He did not specify what. He didn't need to. He looked at Edmund with the uncomplicated attention of a man who was not managing the conversation, not performing equilibrium, a man for whom this moment was simply a moment. Edmund's eyes moved to Sloane. She could see him running calculations, the way he always ran calculations, who was worth more, what the cost-benefit looked like, which framing served his positioning best. She looked back at him and felt something she had not expected. Not triumph. Not even relief, particularly, she felt clear, the way air felt clear after a long period of being indoors. Edmund excused himself within 90 seconds. Something about another guest. She watched him go. Are you all right? Nikolaev asked. Yes, she said, and was surprised to find it was entirely true. She spent 2 hours at that party. She talked to people she wanted to talk to. She did not track Edmund's position in the room, or monitor his expressions, or run the internal calculations she had run every previous time she was in his vicinity, the ones that assessed threat and managed exposure and decided how much of herself to make smaller. She ate 3 of the small lamb things from the passing tray because they were very good. She drank 1 glass of wine. She laughed twice at things that were actually funny. At 11:15, she and Nikolaev left together through the lobby into the December cold. She stopped on the sidewalk. The city was quiet in the way it was quiet after midnight on weeknights, still present, still alive, but at a lower register. He's going to be fine, she said. Not about Edmund, exactly. More about the version of herself that had been organized around worrying about Edmund. He is, Nikolaev agreed. That's not your concern. She turned to look at him. They were standing close, the cold folding around them both, and he was looking at her with that attention. The expensive kind, the kind that didn't get redirected. I built him a podium, she said. You did. I took it apart. You did, he said again, and this time something in his expression opened slightly, the way a room opened when a window was lifted. I noticed. She looked at him for a moment. Then she stepped forward and kissed him, which was not something she had planned to do on a sidewalk in December. Standing in a coat that was not warm enough, outside the building of the man she had once almost married. It was also exactly what she wanted to do. He kissed her back without surprise, the way he did most things. As though the world was generally organized the way it should be, and he was simply participating in it. When they pulled apart, she was cold. She was also warm in the way that had nothing to do with temperature. He put 2 fingers under her chin briefly and looked at her. I'm going to want a 7th Wednesday, he said. You can have all of them, she said. Later, weeks later, on a night when the city had gone white with the first real snow of January, when they were sitting in her apartment with the windows fogged and take-out containers on the coffee table and Nikolaev had fallen asleep on her couch reading, which was not a thing she had ever watched someone do in her home, and which she found she liked very much. She thought about what he had told her on the terrace. The podium you built him, take it apart. You won't need it. She had thought, at the time, that he meant she wouldn't need Edmund's approval, that the liberation was from him specifically, from his particular brand of careful, calibrated diminishment. She understood now that he had meant something larger. He had meant she wouldn't need anyone's podium. Not Edmund's. not the rooms, not the part of herself that had spent 12 years deciding how much space to take, how wide to stand, whether the dress was too much, whether she was too much. She poured tea. She looked at the snow. He had never, not once, looked at her the way Edmund had looked at her. He had looked at her the way she looked at a piece of work she respected, with attention and with the steady conviction that what was there was real and worth the time. She was learning, slowly, to look at herself the same way. She turned the lamp down low, and the snow kept falling, and the city arranged itself outside her window like a thing that had been waiting, with extraordinary patience, for her to simply be in it without apology.